She should have kept walking. That's the thing nobody talks about. That's the part of the story she has never told anyone. Not her father, not Deliso, not the priest at the Woolmy District Church who heard her confessions for 6 years without once hearing the real one. She should have kept walking. It was past midnight. She was 17 years old, carrying a plastic bag of hospital food she had bought with the last of that week's money, walking home through the kind of alley that every girl in every city is warned about before she is warned about anything else. The kind with no light except the borrowed glow from a window above, no sound except water somewhere dripping, no reason to stop. Except he was on the ground. And he was bleeding in a way that meant he wouldn't be breathing much longer if no one made a decision. She almost didn't look. She told herself she didn't look. But her feet had already stopped, and the plastic bag was already on the ground, and she was already crouching beside him before her brain had formally agreed to any of it, because that was the thing about Amara Osei at 17. Her body was braver than her fear. He was barely conscious. One eye half open. The kind of pale that doesn't belong on a face. She couldn't see much in the dark, but she could see enough. The angle of him, the stillness, the way his breathing was doing something wrong in his chest. She pressed her scarf against the wound. She called for help with the voice of a girl who had never called for help before and didn't fully know how. She stayed. She did not know his name. She knew his face. She had known his face for 2 years. From across a school courtyard, from the top of a stairwell, from the particular distance of someone who watched but never approached. The boy from Seonghwa Academy whose silence had infuriated her and whose rare, surgical appearances in the right place at the right moment had, against her will, meant something. She did not think about that. She pressed harder on the wound. She thought, breathe. He breathed. Sometime before morning, when she heard footsteps coming that sounded like help, she made the decision that would quietly govern the next 15 years of her life. She left. Not because she didn't care. Because she cared with the specific terror of a girl who had been burned before by caring about things that were above her station, and she knew, the way you know certain things in your body before your mind assembles the language, that this boy was going to survive, and that the world he survived into was one she could not afford to be found in. She picked up her plastic bag. She walked. She never looked back. He survived. She learned this the way she learned most things about Han Jae-Min in the years that followed. Sideways, accidentally, through the particular cruelty of a world that keeps delivering information about people you are trying to forget. A name in a newspaper. A company on a billboard. A face on the business section of a website she opened for an entirely unrelated reason at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and had to close immediately because the looking was a kind of hunger she could not afford. The boy from the alley had become something else entirely. He hadn't just survived. He had taken the world that nearly killed him and made himself the most dangerous thing in it. 15 years. No contact. No accident. She had been careful, the way you are careful when you understand that proximity to certain people is its own form of fire. And then a Tuesday morning. A black car that should have kept moving. A cafe with a blue door. And Han Jae-Min, standing in the wreckage of 15 years of careful distance, looking at her like the only thing he had ever failed to destroy. It took me 15 winters to find her again. He hadn't been looking. That was the part that undid her. He hadn't been looking. And he found her anyway. She felt the car before she heard it. Not the engine. That had already gone quiet. But the particular stillness that follows a thing that should have kept moving. The way silence fills the space where sound abruptly stops. Amara Osei did not turn around. She had lived in Seoul long enough to know that being noticed was never free. That attention was always a transaction, and in the Woolmy district, the transactions were rarely in your favor. So she stacked the cups on her tray with deliberate focus and kept her eyes on her hands. The cafe door opened behind her. "You're 10 minutes late opening," she called back, assuming it was Subin, her younger co-worker who treated every morning shift like a personal offense. No response. She turned. The man standing in the blue doorway of Sora's cafe was not Subin. He was tall in the way that expensive suits make men taller. His face was a geometry of restraint, Sharp jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that moved over the world the way a lens moves over a target, measuring before committing. There was nothing warm in the way he looked at her. But there was nothing cold, either. It was something more unsettling than both. It was recognition. Amara felt something lock inside her chest. A door she hadn't opened in a very long time, closing itself an extra inch. "We don't open until 8, she said. "I know." He hadn't moved from the doorway. "You're Amara." Not a question. She tilted her head. Steady. Controlled. "You have the wrong person. You have a scar above your left eyebrow." His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that never needed volume because it had never needed to repeat itself. "You got it in the spring of your 3rd year at Seonghwa Academy. A girl named Choi Yirin pushed you into a locker frame." The tray in her hands became very heavy. She set it down. "A lot of people have scars," she said. "Not that one." He took one step inside, just one, as if he understood that the cafe was her territory and he required permission for each inch. "You also have a habit of counting. When you're nervous. Your fingers. Against your thigh. You're doing it right now." She stopped. Her fingers, pressed flat against her apron. She had not even noticed she'd started. Amara looked at him fully for the first time. And the locked door in her chest didn't just close, it barricaded itself. Because she knew this face. Not the suit. Not the authority. Not the version of him that clearly commanded the silence of 53 floors. She knew the face of the boy who had watched her get hurt and never moved. Who had stood 15 meters away with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set and done absolutely nothing while Choi Yirin's friends laughed. She knew Han Jae-Min. And she had spent 14 years making sure she never had to know him again. "We open at 8, she said again. This time her voice was perfectly flat. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he glanced around the cafe, the mismatched chairs, the handwritten menu board, the single wilting plant on the windowsill that she watered every morning out of stubbornness rather than hope. "This business," he said. "It's carrying debt." Her spine went rigid. "Excuse me." 480 million won. Accumulated over 14 years. 3 lending firms and 1 private creditor. He said it the way other men say the weather. Factual. Weightless. The interest rate on the private creditor's portion adjusted 6 months ago. You're currently paying back more per month than this cafe earns. The room felt smaller. "How do you know that?" The steadiness in her voice cost her something, but she paid it. Jae-Min looked at her with those measuring eyes. "Because I made it my business to know," he said. "About 6 hours ago." The front door was still open behind him. Outside, his black car sat at the curb, engine off, driver still and silent as furniture. 2 other vehicles she hadn't noticed before were parked further down the street, facing opposite directions. Not a casual visit. Nothing about Han Jae-Min had ever been casual. "Get out of my cafe," Amara said. He didn't move. But something in his face shifted. Not softened, nothing so yielding as that, but shifted, the way a wall shifts when the foundation beneath it has been struck. "I will," he said. "After you tell me one thing. I don't owe you anything." "No." His voice dropped slightly. "I owe you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Amara's fingers found each other behind her back. She pressed them together hard. She would not count. She would not let him see that. She would not let him see anything. "The answer to your one thing is no," she said. "Whatever it is. The answer is no." He almost smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the expression of a man who had been told no by governments and cartels and had found it, each time, to be an opening rather than a conclusion. "I haven't asked yet," he said. He left before she could respond. The blue door swung closed behind him. Amara stood in the silence of her cafe for a long time. Then she picked up her tray. Then she put it down again. Her fingers were counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. She pressed them flat and walked to the back. By 8:14 a.m., the first of her 3 lending firms sent a message. Asterisk balance cleared. Account closed. No further payment required. Asterisk. By 8:31, the second. By 9:02, her phone stopped working entirely, because the number of incoming messages from unknown accounts confirming debt clearance had crashed the notification system. Amara sat down on the floor of her supply closet and pressed her back against the shelves and understood, with absolute and terrible clarity, that Han Jae-Min had just made it impossible for her to pretend she didn't know him. She also understood something else. That a man who could erase 14 years of debt before breakfast was not doing it out of kindness. He was doing it because he wanted something. And whatever Han Jae-Min wanted, he got. The money was bait. Amara knew it the way she knew the smell of rain before it arrived. Instinctively, physically, the knowledge landing in her bones before her mind had fully processed it. She had grown up watching her father shake hands with men who smiled too smoothly, men who arrived with gifts and left with contracts. She knew what generosity looked like when it was actually architecture. She called her father at 10 a.m. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant the night had been bad. Abba. She kept her voice level. Did anyone contact you last night? About the debts? A pause. Long enough to mean yes. Short enough that he was deciding how much to tell her. A man called, he said finally. His voice was thinner than it used to be. The hospital had filed it down. Very polite. Korean. Said the outstanding balance on the medical bills had been settled by a third-party benefactor. I thought it was a mistake. I called the hospital. They confirmed it. Amara closed her eyes. Medical bills. On top of the cafe debts. He had found those too. How much? She asked. Amara. How much, Abba? He told her. She did the calculation in her head and felt the number land like a stone in deep water, sinking slowly, the ripples spreading long after the impact. Han Jae-Min hadn't paid off her cafe's debt. He had paid off her life. Who is this man? Her father asked. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard in years. Something cautious and old. The particular wariness of a man who had once been trapped by generosity and still carried the scar of it. Someone I used to know, Amara said. Don't worry about him. Amara. In my experience, the ones you tell people not to worry about are precisely the ones. I'll handle it, Abba. Rest. She hung up. She stood in her supply closet for another 30 seconds. Then she walked to the front of the cafe, flipped the sign to closed, sent Subin home, and sat at the corner table with a blank notepad and a pen she forgot to use. She needed to think. Han Jae-Min had been at Seonghwa Academy on a scholarship too, not a financial one. An exception. A special arrangement between the school's board and his father, Chairman Han Sung-woo, who donated enough to name 3 buildings and had apparently also purchased the right to have his son educated among the country's legitimate elite, even though everything the Han family touched was the opposite of legitimate. Jae-Min had been 16. Quiet in a way that wasn't shyness, it was restraint. The kind of boy who chose every word the way a surgeon chooses instruments. He had watched her get bullied for 2 full academic terms without intervening, and she had hated him for it in the way you only hate someone whose indifference genuinely surprises you, which meant some part of her at 16 had expected better from him. She had also, in the shameful and inarticulate way of being 16, noticed him constantly. Not the money. Not his father's name. Him. The way he read, fast like the book owed him something. The way he spoke Korean and switched to English mid-sentence without noticing. The single time in the 3rd term, when Choi Yirin's circle had cornered Amara near the east stairwell and he had appeared at the top of the stairs. Not descending, not approaching, just there. And Yirin's group had dispersed like smoke. He hadn't saved her. He had simply existed in the right place at a moment when his existence was enough. She had never thanked him. He had never acknowledged it. Then her father's world collapsed. And hers collapsed with it. And then the alley. She pressed the pen hard against the notepad. She would not think about the alley. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered before she could stop herself. "I would like to offer you a position," Han Jae-Min said. As if the morning had been entirely unremarkable. As if he had not just restructured her entire financial reality before most people finished their first coffee. "I don't want your position. Environmental Risk Analyst. Vantis Holdings. Tower B. 41st floor. A beat. The compensation is 11 million won per month." Amara's hand tightened on the phone. 11 million won per month. Against zero debt. Against a father in a hospital whose treatment was now, apparently, also covered. She knew what this was. She knew exactly what this was. "And what does an environmental risk analyst do at Vantis Holdings?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. "Whatever I need," he said. The honesty of it, the absence of pretense, almost knocked the breath out of her. "That's not a job description," she said. "No. It's an honest one." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a delivery scooter cut through the Woolmy district's mid-morning calm. "If I say no," she said slowly, "what happens to my father's medical coverage?" A pause. Very short. "It remains. I don't take back what I give." "Then why would I say yes?" "Because your cafe made 42,001 yesterday. And the month before last it made less. And the month before that, less again." His voice was even. Surgical. "Because you are losing, Amara," slowly and quietly, "and you know it, and you are too stubborn to let anyone help you, so I am making it impossible for you to refuse." She breathed in. She breathed out. "You're exactly as infuriating as I remember," she said. "I've been told." The line went quiet for a moment. Not an uncomfortable quiet. Something else. Something that had weight and history in it. "Tower B," she said finally. 41st floor. Monday. 7 a.m. 8, she counted. A pause. 8, he agreed. She hung up and sat for a long time in her closed cafe with its wilting plant and its mismatched chairs and its 14 years of accumulated almost. Then she went to water the plant. She was 4 minutes early. Not because she was eager. Because she had learned a long time ago that being late gave people permission to define you, and she would not hand Han Jae-Min any more tools than he had already taken. Tower B of Vantis Holdings was everything the Woolmy district was not. Marble floors that reflected the ceiling lights so perfectly the building appeared to continue underground. Receptionists who moved with choreographed efficiency. Elevators that didn't make a sound. She was taken to the 41st floor by a woman named Binna who smiled professionally and said nothing of substance and pressed the elevator button with the specific authority of someone who has been told exactly how to manage this particular situation. The 41st floor was open plan. Glass-walled offices around the perimeter, open desks at the center. A dozen faces looked up when the elevator opened. Then, with the practiced discretion of people who had been briefed, they looked back down. Her office, was a glass-walled room near the south-facing window. There was a desk, a chair that cost more than her monthly cafe earnings, a laptop, and a single white orchid in a slim vase. No instructions. No job description. No file of work to begin. Just her name, printed on a card on the door. Asterisk Amara Osei. Environmental Risk Analyst. Asterisk. She sat down. She opened the laptop. She stared at the blinking cursor. At 8:23, the elevator opened. The floor changed when Han Jae-Min walked in. Not dramatically. Not with announcement. Just shifted. The way air shifts before a storm. Backs straightened without appearing to. Voices went quieter by half a note. The building's entire nervous system reoriented toward him the way plants reorient toward light, except this was not something anyone wanted to want. He crossed the floor without looking at anyone. His destination was her office. She knew it before he turned. She kept her eyes on her screen. He knocked once. A formality. "Walk with me," he said from the doorway. "Good morning to you too," she said. He waited. His version of acknowledging the comment. She followed him. He took her to the north-facing window at the end of the floor, where Incheon stretched out in all its layered complexity. The old districts stitched to the new developments, the port in the distance, the sea beyond that. "The building's environmental certification is up for review," he said. "You will manage the documentation for the renewal and represent Vantis in the auditor meetings." She looked at him sideways. "That's an actual job. Did you think it wasn't going to be? I thought environmental risk analyst was a title you invented." Something moved in his jaw. Not quite amusement. It was. "The work is real." She looked back at the city. "Why me? You have a degree in environmental policy from Yonsei." She turned to face him fully. "You had someone pull my academic record. I had someone confirm what I already suspected." He held her gaze without apology. "You're qualified. I haven't used that degree in 6 years. You'll remember. The certainty of it should have been insufferable." It was, in fact, insufferable. But underneath the insufferable was something else she refused to examine. The way it felt to have someone be this certain about her capacity when she had spent 6 years being uncertain about it herself. "I want access to the actual audit files," she said. "Not summaries. The raw data. You'll have it by this afternoon. And I want to run my own analysis. Not approve yours." He nodded once. "And if I find something that reflects badly on the company's environmental record," she said, holding her ground, watching his face, "I report it accurately. I don't adjust numbers to make Vantis look better." A long pause. "If you found something that reflected badly," he said, "I would want to know before the auditors did. So I could fix it. Not hide it." His eyes were steady. "I don't hide problems, Amara. I solve them. The way you solved my debt before I could argue," she almost said. She didn't. "Fine," she said instead. They stood in silence for a moment, the two of them, Incheon beneath them, 15 years of unspoken things compressed into the 6 inches of space between their shoulders. Then the elevator opened, and a woman stepped out. She was beautiful in the precise way of someone who had constructed their beauty with intention. Silk blouse, hair pinned with a single tortoiseshell clip, posture that had been trained. She surveyed the floor with the familiarity of someone who had walked it before, and the slight edge of someone who had noticed a change in the furniture. Her eyes landed on Amara. "Sirin," Jae-Min said, and his voice was different. Not colder, exactly. More contained. "I heard we had a new addition." Sirin's smile was perfect. "Amara, I've been looking forward to meeting you." The way she said looking forward did not match the look in her eyes. Amara smiled back with equal perfection. "Likewise," she said. And the 41st floor, which had already been tense with everything unspoken, became a room where two women understood each other precisely, and that understanding was its own form of danger. She found it on a Wednesday. Not what she was looking for. Worse. The environmental audit files were clean, professionally, suspiciously clean, the kind of clean that meant someone had been through them before her with a very fine instrument and removed anything that breathed. She had expected that. She had started pulling adjacent files, construction contracts, waste management logs, permits from subsidiary companies, the kind of paperwork that nobody thinks to sanitize because it doesn't look like a liability until someone who knows how to read it picks it up. And in a subsidiary company, Chongya Urban Development Limited, registered 12 years ago, operating quietly in the Port District, she found a land acquisition record. She recognized the address. Not the lot number. Not the registration code. The address. 14 Habanoro. Woolmi District. Her father had lived at 12 Habanoro. She sat very still and read the document 3 times. Chongya Urban Development Limited had purchased 7 adjacent properties in the Woolmi District 14 years ago through a chain of shell purchases. The kind that required either excellent lawyers or someone with regulatory access, or both. The purchases had been made during a period of financial distress in the district. Distress that, according to a secondary document she found 40 minutes later, had been partly engineered by the withdrawal of a major port contract that had employed most of the area's working population. The port contract that had been pulled was awarded to a company with no Vantis branding anywhere on it. But the company's registered director was a man named Han Jae-Min's father. Amara leaned back in her chair and looked at the white orchid on her desk, and felt the specific nausea of a thing you have long suspected becoming a thing you can no longer avoid knowing. Her father's financial collapse. 14 years ago. The debt collectors. The hospital. The cafe built on the ruins of a neighborhood that had been quietly and deliberately dismantled. It hadn't been misfortune. It had been architecture. She closed the files. She opened them again. She read everything a fourth time, making sure she was not constructing a pattern from coincidence, making sure the rage building behind her sternum wasn't writing the story instead of the documents. The documents were writing it themselves. She called her father. Abba. The port contract. 14 years ago. The one that went to a new company. Do you remember who those people were? Silence. The longest one he had given her in years. Amara. Do you remember? There was a chairman, he said slowly. Han Sung-woo. But we could never prove. I know, she said. I found it. Another silence. Where are you? He asked. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was frightened and trying not to be. She looked around the 41st floor of Vantis Holdings Tower B. At the glass walls. At her name on the door. At the orchid Jae-Min had placed on her desk like a question she hadn't answered. Somewhere I probably shouldn't be, she said. She ended the call. The elevator opened and Jae-Min walked in. He crossed directly to her office. When he opened the door, she was standing with her arms crossed and the files open on the screen and the exact expression she had promised herself she would not wear, the one that showed everything. He stopped. His eyes moved to the screen, then back to her face. In that single exchange, screen to face to screen, something shifted between them. Not cracked. Not broken. Rearranged. How long have you known? She asked. He closed the office door behind him. He did not move closer. He stood with his back to the glass, and she registered that he had done this deliberately, positioned himself so anyone on the floor looking in would see only his back. Known what specifically, he said, because I suspect we may mean different things. Your father. Her voice was controlled with significant effort. The port contract. Hey Bonaro. My father's neighborhood. The debts he's been carrying for 14 years because the work disappeared one morning and never came back. She paused. Did you know when you found me? Jae-Min looked at her. Really looked, in a way he had been carefully not doing since the cafe, like he'd been managing the distance, rationing it, and this moment had just taken the ration away. No, he said. Not the specifics. I knew my father had holdings in that district. I didn't know the mechanism. A pause. I know now. Because I've been running the same search you have, from a different direction, for the last 4 days. She stared at him. You've been investigating your own father. I've been investigating my own father for 6 years, he said. This is one of the newer files. The statement landed like a stone. Amara uncrossed her arms. She crossed them again. She breathed. You paid our debts, she said slowly, building it out loud, piece by piece. You created this job. You put me in this building. And part of your reason, not all of it but part, was so you would have a witness. Someone with legitimate professional standing who could independently confirm what the documents show. Jae-Min said nothing, which was the same as yes. That, she said, is the coldest thing anyone has ever done for me. It is also, he said quietly, the most honest. The words hung between them. Amara looked at the man in front of her, not the chairman, not the boy from the academy, and saw, for the first time, what 15 years had actually made of him. Not the monster her anger had needed him to be. Not the hero her 16-year-old self had briefly wanted. Something more complicated and more damaging than either. "Get out of my office," she said. He went. And she sat back down and looked at the files and understood that the story she had thought she was living, the one where she survived her father's ruin and built something small and hers, had never been the real story. The real story had been this one. All along. Sirin did not confront. She arranged. Amara learned this on a Thursday morning when she arrived to find her access card declined at the 41st floor. Not a mistake. A recalibration. The kind that required someone with administrator access to have thought about it the night before. She took the stairs. 21 floors, because the stairwell access ended at 20, and the door between 20 and 21 had been left open, which was either carelessness or an invitation, and Amara had decided she was done interpreting things as anything but what they were. She arrived at the 41st floor slightly breathless and completely composed. Sirin was at the coffee station with the languid comfort of someone who owned every room she entered. She looked at Amara over her cup with an expression that was carefully, expertly warm. "The access card system updated overnight," Sirin said. "IT is fixing it. These things happen." "They do," Amara agreed pleasantly. "You look tired," Sirin said, and it was the most precisely aimed observation in the conversation. "I look like someone who just climbed 21 floors," Amara said. "Which is accurate." Sirin smiled. Amara smiled. They were two women holding identical weapons at identical angles, and neither of them pretended otherwise, and the honesty of it was almost comfortable. "He hasn't been like this before," Sirin said, setting her cup down. Her voice shifted, not warmer, but more direct. "In 15 years of knowing him. He's never rearranged himself around a person." Amara kept her expression steady. "I'm not asking him to." "No." Sirin looked at her with something that was almost respect and almost grief and entirely complicated. "That's precisely the problem." She left. Amara stood at the coffee station and thought, she loves him. Not performatively. Not strategically, though the engagement was certainly that too. She loves him the way you love a thing you've held for so long you've forgotten it isn't yours. Which meant Amara was not dealing with a rival. She was dealing with a woman in pain who happened to have administrative access to the building systems and the attention of a very powerful father-in-law-to-be, who was currently the subject of a private investigation. Her phone rang. Chairman Han Sung-woo's assistant, the woman's voice even and pleasant. The chairman would like to meet for tea. Today, if you're available. Amara looked at her phone for a long moment. Today, if you're available from the chairman of a criminal enterprise meant. Today, because I have already decided. She went. The meeting was in a private room at a hotel in Songdo that had never had a bad review because nobody who stayed there had ever felt safe enough to complain. Chairman Han was smaller than she'd imagined from the architecture of his legacy. A trim man in his 60s with silver hair and the specific charm of someone who had spent decades making dangerous things seem reasonable. He poured tea. He asked about her father. He asked about her work. And then he said, "I understand you've been reviewing some historical acquisition records." Amara drank her tea. "That falls within my scope," she said. "Of course." His smile was pleasant. "I only mention it because some of those records are contextually sensitive. Business decisions that were made under different regulatory frameworks. It would be unfortunate if they were misread." "I'm a thorough reader," she said. "I rarely misread." Something behind his pleasant expression went very still. "Your father is at Inha University Hospital," he said. "Excellent facility. The treatment he's receiving is genuinely the best available." He set his cup down. It would be tragic if funding complications arose. The room was very quiet. Amara looked at Chairman Han Sung-woo, the architect of her father's ruin, the man who had purchased a neighborhood's desperation and built an empire on it, and felt, in her chest, something cold and very clear arrive. "Is that a threat?" she asked. "It's a contextual note," he said warmly. She set down her own cup. She stood. "Tell your son," she said, "that I found everything." She walked out. She did not take the elevator. She walked down 17 floors of hotel stairwell and out through the service entrance, because she knew the lobby would have his people in it, and she needed 3 unobserved minutes before anyone was able to read her face. In the stairwell between the 4th and 3rd floors, she sat on a step and pressed her back against the wall and let herself shake for exactly 90 seconds. Then she stood up and called Jae-Min. He answered before the first ring completed. "Your father just threatened my father's medical care," she said. Silence. 1 second. 2. "Are you in the hotel?" he asked. "Leaving through the service exit." "Don't take a taxi. My driver is already outside." "How?" "Because I knew he would call you in." His voice was completely flat. The kind of flat that meant something very large was being pressed down very hard. "I've been waiting for him to make this move." "You used me as bait," she said. "I used myself as bait. You became relevant because he became aware of you." That is a profoundly unsatisfying distinction. "I know." A beat. "Amara, are you all right?" The question, quiet, direct, stripped of its usual containment, hit her somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd floors. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm angry." "Good," he said. "Stay angry. I need you functional." She almost laughed. She did not laugh. She walked out through the service exit into the grey Songdo afternoon, and the black car was already there, and she got in, and the door closed, and she looked out the window at the city her father's generation had built and this one had stripped, and she thought, "I am in the middle of something I cannot get out of." She also thought, with less welcome clarity, "I am not sure I want to." The coup began on a Friday. Not with violence. Jae-Min did not work with violence when paperwork was available, and 14 years of his father's financial crimes had generated extraordinary paperwork. At 6 a.m., 11 members of the Vantis Holdings board received identical encrypted documents. Independent financial forensics. Shell company trails. Regulatory filings that had been adjusted with the kind of precision that required either institutional access or paid cooperation inside the regulatory body itself. By 7:30, 3 board members had called their lawyers. By 8:15, 2 had called Chairman Han. By 8:17, Chairman Han called Jae-Min. Amara was in the 41st floor office. She had been there since 6:30, at Jae-Min's instruction, with one task. Sit with the documents open, be a presence, be the independent professional witness who had arrived at these findings through legitimate audit process. Her name on a door that said Environmental Risk Analyst was no longer interior decoration. It was evidence of chain of custody. She heard Jae-Min's voice from his closed office at the end of the floor. She could not make out words. She could make out tone. She had spent years listening to her father argue with men who held power over him, and she knew what it sounded like when the power shifted. It sounded like Jae-Min's voice right now. The call lasted 9 minutes. When he came out, Tae-oh was already moving toward him with a tablet. 2 other men she didn't know were on phones. The floor, which had been muted and waiting, became the particular kind of controlled chaos that Jae-Min apparently generated around himself. High velocity, low noise, every person clear on their function. He crossed to her office. Opened the door. "He's moving the offshore accounts," he said. Which means he anticipated this. His face was still. Too still. The kind of still that meant he was burning very hot somewhere no one could see it. "He has 3 hours before I can block the transfers. If he moves that capital, I lose the financial evidence trail on the overseas operations." "What do you need me to do?" "The environmental violations in the subsidiary records, the Chongya development files. I need them formatted for the regulatory authority submission. Right now. If I can get a parallel filing in with the Ministry of Environment, it creates a secondary legal hold on the company assets. I need 2 hours for a proper submission." "You have 90 minutes. She was already turning to her computer. "Amara." She looked back. Jae-Min stood in the doorway with Inchan behind him through the glass and something in his face she had not seen since she was 16 years old, standing in an east stairwell, watching him appear at the top of the stairs. "This is the moment where you can leave," he said quietly. "If your name is on the submission, you are formally involved. My father will know it. He will not stop at one meeting over tea." She held his gaze. "You paid 480 million won in debt before you'd said 10 words to me," she said. "We were already past the moment I could leave." Something in his expression broke open slightly. "Just a fracture. Just enough." 90 minutes, he said. 80, she said. "Go deal with your father." He left. She worked. What Jae-Min did not tell her was what happened in the 61st floor executive suite when he walked in to face his father directly. Chairman Han was at his desk, composed. The offshore transfer already initiated through a secondary account Jae-Min had not known existed until 12 minutes ago. He had his hands folded and the expression of a man who had expected this confrontation for years and had spent those years constructing an exit. "You'll choose legacy over a driver's daughter," he said. Not even as an argument. As a statement of what he believed to be inevitable. Jae-Min looked at his father. Really looked, the way he'd spent 31 years carefully not doing, building a wall between what he observed and what he felt about it, and said, "I already chose. You will regret this." "I've spent 15 years regretting silence," Jae-Min said. "I'm done with that particular regret." He laid a second document on the desk. The one he hadn't shared with the board. The one that went further back. The one that included the Woolmy port contract and the name of every official who had been paid to make it happen. "The Ministry of Justice received this 40 minutes ago," Jae-Min said. "As of this morning, you have 3 hours before your primary accounts are frozen. I'd use them to call your lawyers." Chairman Han looked at the document. Then at his son. "I made you," he said. "Yes," Jae-Min said. "And I rebuilt myself." He walked out. He did not take the elevator. He walked 61 flights of stairs at a pace just short of running, and when he arrived at the 41st floor, breathing hard for the first time she had ever seen, Amara looked up from her screen and said, 74 minutes. It's done." She turned the screen toward him. He looked at the submission confirmation. Then he sat down on the edge of her desk, the first unguarded, unprofessional thing she had seen him do, and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Then he was composed again. But she had seen it. "Go home," he said. "I'm not done." "You are. Go home. I have people handling the next stage." He looked at her. "Your father's care is protected regardless of what happens next. I've moved his account to a trust that can't be touched by anything associated with my father. It's legally separated." She stared at him. "When did you do that?" "This morning. Before the board documents went out." His voice was quiet. "I wasn't going to start this and leave him exposed." Amara sat with that for a moment. "Jae-Min," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his name directly, without distance, without armoring it. He went very still. "What exactly are we doing?" He looked at her for a long moment. Longer than was professional. Longer than was safe. "I don't know," he said. "I know what I want. I have been less certain about the rest. What do you want?" The floor was empty. Teo and the others had moved to other floors, other operations. The city glittered beyond the glass. The orchid on her desk had opened another petal overnight. "Not to lose you again," he said simply. "I'm aware that's not an answer. I'm aware I haven't earned the right to want it. I'm telling you anyway." Amara looked at him. "Go manage your coup," she said. "Yes. We'll talk after." Something shifted in his face that she would think about later, in the car, in her apartment, standing at her window looking at nothing. "After," he agreed. She ran. Not in fear. In the particular careful logic of a woman who has been in the middle of someone else's war long enough to know that staying means choosing a side, And choosing a side means whatever happens next is also yours to carry. Amara booked the flight at 11 p.m. She packed 2 bags. She called her father. He didn't answer, which meant he was sleeping, which meant his night had been better, which meant she could leave him a voicemail that sounded calm. She left it. She had arranged for a friend, Deliso, who owed her an uncountable number of favors and had a spare room in Nairobi, to receive her. She had arranged nothing else. The private terminal at Incheon International was quiet at 2 a.m. 3 other passengers. Staff who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who worked while the city slept. She was at the gate when the clearance light for her flight went from green to amber. Not red. Amber. Processing. She looked at the board. Then she looked at the walkway behind her. Han Jae-Min was crossing the terminal floor. He was not running. He never ran. He walked with the specific velocity of a man who had decided that destination was not in question, only timing, and timing was a formality. He was still in his work clothes, no tie, top button open, the first concession to disorder she had seen from him all day. He reached the gate. They stood 3 feet apart. "You delayed my flight," she said. 45 minutes. He held her gaze. "Using corporate clearance authority that I will absolutely be questioned about tomorrow, and I don't care." "You had no right." "No," he said. "I didn't. I did it anyway." He breathed. "I need 45 minutes. I need you to hear me. And then if you walk onto that plane, I will have Teo ensure your father's trust is documented and protected, and I will not contact you again." His voice was steady. "But I need 45 minutes. She looked at him. She sat down on the nearest seat. He sat down across from her. The terminal was almost empty. Somewhere behind them, someone's luggage wheel squeaked. An announcement, in Korean and English, about a delayed arrival from Hong Kong. "The alley," she said. 15 years ago. Tell me what happened." He looked at her steadily. "I was supposed to meet my father's lieutenant that night," he said. "I'd been told the meeting was about transitioning into the family operations. I was 17. I thought I had a choice. I went to tell him I wouldn't." He paused. 3 men were waiting instead of 1. The meeting was a test of whether I was useful or a liability. He paused again. "It appears I was a liability. You were bleeding in an alley." "Yes." "And I found you." "Yes." Something crossed his face. "I had been conscious enough to know what you looked like. I didn't know your name. I knew your face. The scar. The way you moved." He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "You were the only person who had ever stayed with me when I was at my worst. And I didn't even deserve that, because I had spent 2 years watching you be hurt and choosing not to intervene, because intervening meant my father's world found out I had attachments. And you couldn't have attachments. A boy in that world with something to love," he said quietly, "gives everyone in that world a weapon." Amara sat with that. She had been 16 and furious at his indifference. She had not, at 16, understood that his indifference was armor. That watching from 15 meters while Yirin's group dispersed was the most protection he could offer without painting a target on her. "When you woke up in the alley," she said, "I was gone. You were gone. And I spent 3 days trying to find you. And then my father's people found me first." He paused. "I was told to leave it. To leave you. That any connection to a girl from that district was a complication I couldn't afford. And you listened." His jaw tightened. "I was 17 and afraid, and I had just learned that the men I was surrounded by were willing to put me in an alley to make a point." He held her gaze. "I'm not telling you that to excuse it. I'm telling you so you know I have been paying for it since 15 winters," she said softly. 15 winters, he said. "No one else. Not because I was waiting. Not consciously. Because nobody fit. Nothing fit. And I didn't understand why until a Tuesday morning in the Woolme district." Amara looked at the departure board. 30 minutes left on her delay. I am terrified of you, she said. It came out more honest than she intended. Not of what you are. Of what wanting you costs. I have spent 15 years building something mine. Small and struggling and mine. And you walked back in and paid off my debt and gave me an orchid and told your father's entire empire to burn. And now nothing is small anymore, and I don't know if that's... I know, he said. You can't know. I know because I spent 15 years making everything mine too. Small and controlled and protected. And I saw you at a cafe with an apron and a tray of cups, and I stopped a car I have never once stopped for anything that wasn't a crisis. He leaned forward slightly. Elbows on knees. Closer than he'd been. You are not a complication I couldn't afford. You are the reason the accounting was always wrong. She looked at him. The departure board flicked to green. Clearance restored. Wanting you was the most dangerous thing I've ever done, she said. His eyes held hers. Then let me be the danger that protects you, he said. The terminal was quiet. Somewhere above them, Seoul's sky was beginning its transition from black to the first gray of early morning. Amara looked at the gate. Looked at the man in front of her. Looked at the 15 years between them and the 15 minutes of amber light that had just made the decision unavoidable. She picked up one bag. She left the other on the seat. My father needs someone to visit him this week, she said, standing. He's at Inha University Hospital. Jae-Min stood too. I'll go today, he said. I'll ask for his forgiveness for what my family did. And I will ask his permission. For what? For this, he said simply. She looked at him for one long final moment. Then she walked back through the terminal, away from the gate, away from Nairobi, away from the careful small life she had been trying to preserve, and did not look back. Because she had learned, a long time ago, that looking back was not the same as being brave. Walking forward was. 3 months later, Chairman Han Sung-woo was exiled from the Vantis Holdings board and under formal investigation by the Ministry of Justice and 3 regulatory bodies. His offshore accounts were frozen. His lawyers were excellent and it would take years, but the architecture of decades had been documented and filed and witnessed, and it would not survive the light. Yoo Se-rin withdrew from the engagement 11 days after the board documents went out. She released a brief statement. She moved to Singapore. Jae-Min did not hear from her, and did not pursue contact, and hoped, privately and genuinely, that she found something worth building. Amara's father, Kwame Osei, walked again in October. Not without difficulty. Not without pain. But on his own, down the corridor of Inha University Hospital, in the specific determined shuffle of a man who had refused to concede to the body's failures. Jae-Min was there. He had been there often enough that the nurses knew his name, and the orderlies had stopped treating him with deference and started treating him with the gentle exasperation reserved for people who linger. In November, on a morning when Incheon was shaking off the last cold breath of autumn and the cherry trees along the promenade were bare but standing, Jae-Min arrived at Kwame Osei's room with a small box and a formality that sat awkwardly on him. The particular vulnerability of a man who could face down a criminal empire but found sincerity the more difficult terrain. Kwame looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "You know, I already told her yes." Jae-Min looked up. "She asked me 3 weeks ago," Kwame said, "whether I would accept you." He folded his hands on his blanket. "I told her, that depends entirely on whether he asks me himself, or whether he has people do it." A pause. "I see he asks himself. I always ask myself," Jae-Min said. "For the things that matter." Kwame nodded. Slowly. "Then sit down," he said. "And let me tell you about her mother. Because if you are going to know my daughter, you should know where she comes from. All of where she comes from." Jae-Min sat down. He stayed for 3 hours. When Amara arrived at the hospital at midday and found them both asleep in adjacent chairs, her father in his hospital bed, Jae-Min in the plastic visitor's chair with his suit jacket folded on his lap and his head tilted slightly back, she stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she went to find the nurse to ask for a second blanket. The nurse gave her one without being asked a second time. She brought it back and placed it over Jae-Min with the quiet care of someone who has decided, finally, that caring is not the same as losing. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning. Light, uncertain, the kind that lands and vanishes before it can be called accumulation. But it was there. Beginning. The first of what might, with patience, become something that stayed. She sat in the second chair, between them, and waited for spring.